She thought she was worthless and invisible until a human treated her like royalty. Zafia pressed her face against the metal grating, watching the lights dance across polished floors 3 levels above. The diplomatic gala sparkled with crystalline chandeliers and flowing champagne, with dignitaries from a dozen worlds laughing and spinning in elaborate gowns. Her breath fogged the metal as she adjusted the wrench in her hand, purple hair plastered to her neck with sweat from the humid maintenance shaft. The emerald skin of her arms glistened under the dim utility lights as she reached deeper into the cooling system's guts. They never looked down. Not once in the 5 years she'd worked these tunnels had anyone at those parties glanced at the grating and seen her watching. She was invisible, worthless, just another lower-caste drone keeping their perfect world running while they pretended people like her didn't exist. The cooling coil released with a hiss of released pressure. Zafia caught it before the hot metal could clatter against the shaft walls, her reflexes honed by years of silent work. Veridian society had 3 truths: warriors protected, scholars governed, and maintenance castes served. The 4th unspoken truth was simpler. Only the first 2 mattered. She was tightening the replacement coil when the alarm screamed. Red emergency lights flooded the tunnel, turning her green skin black in the pulsing darkness. Her wrist comm crackled with static before a harsh voice cut through. Environmental failure Section 7, Diplomatic Wing, respond immediately. Zafia was already moving, her tool bag slung over her shoulder as she navigated the maze of access tunnels. Her fingers found handholds in the darkness without thought, her body remembering every pipe and conduit. Section 7 meant the main oxygen regulators. If those failed, the entire diplomatic wing would suffocate in minutes. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she ran. The environmental control hub was chaos when she arrived. Warning displays painted the walls red, and the main regulator was screaming, temperature spiking, pressure dropping, fail-safes triggering in cascading sequence. She dropped to her knees beside the primary access panel and ripped it open, her amber eyes scanning the tangle of connections inside. "What's the status?" The voice came from behind her, and Zephia froze, not because of the words, but because of the tone, curious, engaged, like he actually expected an answer. She turned slowly, still kneeling on the floor. The human stood in the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, in a formal diplomatic suit that somehow looked comfortable on him. Dark hair, sharp eyes that tracked to her face instead of sliding past like she wasn't there. He held himself with easy confidence, but there was nothing dismissive in his posture. "The oxygen regulator is failing," she said, her voice rough from disuse. Lower castes didn't speak unless spoken to, and no one spoke to them. "If I can't bypass the damaged circuits in the next 4 minutes, everyone in the diplomatic wing will lose atmosphere." "What do you need?" The question startled her so badly she almost dropped her diagnostic tool. She looked at him fully then, trying to understand what she was seeing. He met her gaze steadily, waiting. "I need you to monitor that display," she said, gesturing to the wall panel. "Tell me when the temperature drops below critical." He moved to the display without hesitation, his fingers dancing across the interface with surprising familiarity. Zafia turned back to the regulator, her hands moving on automatic while her mind raced. Who was this human? Why was he here instead of evacuating with the other diplomats? 42 degrees and falling, he said. She isolated the damaged circuit and rerouted power through the secondary system. The regulator's screaming dropped to a whine, then to a steady hum. The red lights faded to amber, then green. Zephia sagged back on her heels, purple hair falling across her face. 38 degrees, the human said. Stabilizing, that was impressive. Zephia looked up at him, searching for mockery and finding none. He was smiling at her, genuine appreciation in his expression. Her chest tightened with something she couldn't name. "What's your name?" The question hit her like a physical blow. No one had asked her name in years. Lower castes had designation numbers, not names. The fact that she still thought of herself as Zephia instead of Maintenance Unit 2847 was a small rebellion she kept private. "Zafia," she said, the word feeling foreign on her tongue after so long unused. "James Dalton," he said, extending his hand. Human diplomatic envoy. I followed the emergency alerts. Environmental systems fascinate me. The way everything interconnects, how one small adjustment can affect an entire ecosystem. She stared at his outstretched hand, not understanding. Then slowly, hesitantly, she reached out and took it. His palm was warm, his grip firm but not crushing. The touch sent electricity racing up her arm. "How long have you worked these systems?" he asked, releasing her hand but maintaining eye contact. 5 years, she said, since I was assigned to this station. Then you know them better than anyone. He crouched beside her, looking at the regulator's exposed circuits. Can you tell me what caused the failure? I noticed the cascade pattern seemed unusual. Zephia blinked at him. He was asking her opinion. Actually asking, like her answer mattered. She turned to the diagnostic readout, her training overriding her confusion. The primary relay should have caught the overload, she said, tracing the failure pattern on the screen. But it didn't trigger. Neither did the secondary or tertiary backups. That's not a failure. That's... She stopped, ice flooding her veins as she understood what she was seeing. That's sabotage, James finished quietly. The door hissed open behind them. Commander Rila strode in, her security detail flanking her with weapons drawn. The Veridian woman's dark green skin seemed to absorb the light, her black uniform perfectly pressed despite the emergency. Her eyes swept over Zafia with the same regard one might give a malfunctioning tool. Maintenance Unit 2847, Rilla said, her voice clipped and cold. You are under arrest for sabotage of station systems and attempted murder of diplomatic personnel. That's absurd, James said, standing to his full height. She just saved everyone in the diplomatic wing. She was the last person logged into this system, Rila said, her hand moving to the restraints at her belt. The access codes match her designation. The evidence is clear. Zephia's breath caught in her throat. The world tilted sideways as security officers grabbed her arms, pulling her to her feet. Her tool bag clattered to the floor. This couldn't be happening. She'd saved them. She'd done her job. I want to review that evidence, James said, his voice hardening. Diplomatic privilege grants me access to all materials relevant to the safety of human personnel. Your request is noted, Rella said, snapping the restraints around Zephia's wrists, the metal bit into her green skin. The investigation will take approximately 3 standard cycles. If found guilty, the sentence for sabotage is public execution as an example to the lower castes. 3 days. Zafia would be dead in 3 days for a crime she didn't commit. The irony was almost funny. She'd spent her whole life invisible, and now the one time people were actually looking at her, it was to watch her die. As security dragged her toward the door, she caught James's eyes. What she saw there stopped her breath. Not contempt or suspicion, but genuine concern. Real, tangible concern directed at her, like she was a person worth caring about. The expression was so foreign, so incomprehensible, that she couldn't look away even as they pulled her into the corridor. The door sealed behind her with a hiss of hydraulics, cutting off his gaze. Zafia stumbled as the officers hauled her forward, her mind spinning. She might die without ever understanding why that human had looked at her that way. Why he'd looked at her at all. The holding cell was exactly what Zafia expected. 2 meters square, a hard bench, a waste facility behind a privacy screen that didn't quite reach the floor. The walls were the same institutional gray as every lower caste space on the station, designed to be forgettable. She sat on the bench with her back against the cold metal, purple hair falling forward to hide her face. Her wrists ached where the restraints had been. Commander Rella had removed them with unnecessary force, leaving green bruises already forming on her emerald skin. The cell door had sealed with the same hydraulic hiss that seemed to punctuate every moment of her life. Doors closing, opportunities sealing shut, the universe reminding her of her place. Except for those few minutes with James Dalton. Those minutes when someone had asked her name and actually waited for the answer. Zafia pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to stop the thoughts spiraling through her mind. She was going to die. In 3 days, they'd take her to some public space and execute her while the elite watched and nodded approvingly. Lower castes needed to remember their place. She'd be a lesson, a warning, a story mothers would tell their children about what happened when you reached above your station. The fact that she hadn't sabotaged anything wouldn't matter. It never did. Hours crawled past. The cell had no windows, no way to mark time except for the steady pulse of her heartbeat and the distant hum of the station's systems. Those systems she knew better than her own body, the ones she'd dedicated 5 years to maintaining, understanding, perfecting. The ones someone had used to frame her. The door opened. Zephia looked up sharply, expecting Commander Rila or an interrogator. Instead, James Dalton stepped through, a datapad tucked under his arm and a security authorization badge clipped to his jacket. The door sealed behind him with that inevitable hiss. "I've negotiated your release into my custody," he said without preamble. "The Veridian authorities agreed because diplomatic relations are too valuable to risk over what they consider a minor investigation." Zafia stared at him, her mind struggling to process the words. Released? Into his custody? She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. "Why?" "Because you're innocent," James said, crossing to where she sat and extending his hand. "And because I need your expertise to find whoever actually sabotaged those systems before they try again." She looked at his hand, then up at his face. His expression was open, honest, like this was the most natural thing in the world, rescuing a condemned lower-caste worker and asking for her help. Her fingers trembled as she reached up and let him pull her to her feet. "I don't understand," she said. "Then let me explain while we work." He gestured toward the door. "I've arranged quarters where we can review the maintenance logs without interference, unless you'd prefer to stay here." The question was gentle, giving her a choice when she'd never had one before. Zephia shook her head, purple hair swaying around her shoulders. James smiled and led her out of the cell. The corridors were nearly empty at this hour, just a few lower-caste workers hurrying between shifts with their heads down. Zephia recognized the pattern. Move quickly. Make no eye contact. Be invisible. She'd perfected it over 5 years, but walking beside James she felt exposed, like everyone could see her suddenly. His quarters were in the diplomatic wing, 3 levels above anywhere she'd ever been outside of maintenance shafts. The door read his biometrics and opened onto a space that made her stop breathing. Soft lighting, real furniture instead of standard-issue bunks, a viewport showing the stars beyond the station. Luxury she'd only glimpsed through gratings. "Come in," James said, noticing her hesitation. "Please." Zephia stepped inside, her bare feet sinking into actual carpet. The door sealed behind them, and suddenly the space felt intimate, private, in a way that made her hyper-aware of his presence. He moved to a central table where holographic displays waited, spreading maintenance logs across the air with practiced efficiency. "I've had all your access records pulled for the past month," he said, gesturing her closer. "Walk me through everything you did in Section 7. Not as an interrogation, as a collaboration. I need your expertise." Zafia moved to stand beside him, close enough that she could smell him. Clean and masculine, completely unlike the recycled air and industrial solvents she'd breathed for years. The scent made her dizzy. She forced herself to focus on the logs floating between them. "I did a routine inspection of the cooling systems on 3rd shift," she said, her finger tracing the timeline. "Standard maintenance. The regulators were operating within normal parameters." "And here," James said, leaning closer to point at an entry. His shoulder brushed hers and heat flooded through her body at the contact. "This secondary access 12 hours later?" "That wasn't me." Zephia pulled up the detailed timestamp, her training overriding the distraction of his proximity. "I was off shift, but the access code is mine." "Someone used your credentials." James manipulated the display, pulling up security footage, but the cameras were disabled in that corridor for scheduled maintenance. "Scheduled by whom?" "Station Administrator Vektis," James said, his voice hardening. "Who has the authority to disable security systems and access any maintenance credentials on the station?" Zafia felt the pieces clicking together in her mind. Vektis, one of the highest-ranking Veridians on the station, a man who'd walked past her hundreds of times without acknowledgement. Why would someone like him sabotage environmental systems? There have been whispers, she said slowly, among the lower castes. Talk of organizing, demanding better conditions, basic rights. James turned to look at her fully, his eyes intense. And sabotage blamed on a lower caste worker would justify a crackdown. We're tools, Zafia said, the bitterness rising in her throat. Disposable. If one malfunctions, you destroy it and terrify the others into compliance. You're not a tool. His voice was quiet but fierce. You're a person, a brilliant engineer who knows these systems better than anyone on this station. The words hit her like a physical force. She looked up at him, searching his face for mockery or manipulation, and finding only conviction. The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. I have the guest room prepared, James said, though he didn't step back. You should rest. We'll continue investigating in the morning. Guest room? You'll be staying here while under my custody. I'm not leaving you in some detention area. He finally moved away, putting professional distance between them. The room has a private bathroom, clean clothes that should fit. Take whatever time you need. Zephia followed him through a doorway into a space that was larger than the dormitory section she shared with 15 other workers. An actual bed with soft linens, a bathroom with running water and towels that looked unused. She turned to find James watching her from the doorway, something unreadable in his expression. Thank you, she said, the words inadequate for what she was feeling. Get some rest, Zafia. He said her name like it mattered, like she mattered. We have work to do tomorrow. The door closed, giving her privacy. Zephia stood in the center of the room, trembling. She stripped off her stained coveralls and stepped into the bathroom, turning on the water and watching it run clear and hot. Lower castes bathed in communal facilities with recycled water rationed by the minute. She stood under the spray until her green skin was flushed dark, until her purple hair hung heavy down her back. Her body ached with exhaustion, but underneath that was something else, a restless energy that made her skin too sensitive, her breath too shallow. The bed was soft beyond comprehension when she finally lay down in the borrowed clothes. Through the wall, she could hear James moving in the next room. The sounds were intimate. Footsteps, water running, the rustle of fabric. She pressed her hand against her chest, feeling her heart race. Her fingers drifted lower, almost of their own accord, trailing over her stomach. She'd never touched herself like this before, never had the privacy or the desire. But now her body burned with unfamiliar need, her mind filled with images of James's hands instead of her own. The way he'd looked at her, the warmth of his touch when he'd helped her stand. A sound came from the next room, footsteps stopping, then silence. Zephia froze, her hand still on her skin, wondering if he could hear her breathing through the wall, if he was standing there thinking the same impossible thoughts. The silence stretched between them like a living thing, full of possibilities neither of them could name. Zephia pulled her hand away and rolled onto her side, staring at the wall that separated them. Her body throbbed with want, her mind spinning with questions that had no answers. Sleep, when it finally came, was restless and full of dreams, where amber eyes met dark ones without barriers between them, where touch wasn't forbidden and worth wasn't determined by caste, where she was seen not as invisible or worthless, but as something precious, something worth saving. Morning light filtered through the viewport when Zephia woke, disoriented by softness and silence. She'd spent her life in communal bunks with constant noise. This peace felt alien. She rose and splashed water on her face, braiding her purple hair before emerging from the guest room. James stood at the viewport with coffee, already dressed. He poured her a cup without asking, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The electric shock of contact made her breath catch. I traced Vektis's access patterns last night, he said, pulling up holographic displays. He's been using other people's credentials for weeks. Yours was just the most recent. Zafia studied the data over his shoulder, close enough to smell him. Clean and masculine, intoxicating. Can we prove it? Not yet, but his private office might have evidence. James turned to face her. Diplomatic immunity gives me access to administrative areas. As my technical consultant, you could come with me. Every instinct screamed danger, but she thought of his words, "You're a person, not a tool," and nodded. When? Now. The corridors were busy, and Zephia felt every stare as they walked together. Lower castes moved aside automatically while elite Veridians registered her presence with shock and disgust. James seemed oblivious, his stride confident. The administrative tower required biometric clearance. James placed his palm on the scanner and gestured Zafia through first, a courtesy that made her throat tight. The executive level was a world designed for people who mattered. Polished floors, warm lighting, Veridian art on every wall. Vektis's office door read James's credentials and opened. The administrator sat behind an ornate desk, his dark green skin and elaborate robes marking elite status. His eyes widened at their entrance. Envoy Dalton, Vektis said, "This is unexpected." Administrator Vektis, "I'm investigating discrepancies in the access logs from yesterday's sabotage." Vektis's gaze slid past Zephia dismissively. "What discrepancies?" "Cameras disabled in Section 7 12 hours before the incident. Secondary access using her credentials while she was off shift. Lower castes share codes sometimes, against protocol but common." Vektis leaned back. "Is there a point?" "The point is someone with high clearance framed her." Vektis's expression shifted to amusement. "Her? The maintenance unit?" "Envoy, I understand humans have peculiar attitudes toward service castes, but surely you don't expect me to take accusations seriously from something barely sentient." Zafia felt the words like blows. She kept her eyes down, falling into old patterns of invisibility. "Her name is Zafia," James said, his voice cold. "She identified the sabotage pattern. She's why I'm asking questions instead of filing formal charges." "Charges? Based on what, a drone's word?" "Based on your personal access during the credential theft timeframe, your authorization to disable cameras, your approval of evacuation protocols designed to trap people in the diplomatic wing." Vektis's amusement vanished. He stood slowly, using height to intimidate. "Dangerous accusations based on circumstantial evidence and lower caste paranoia. We both know why you did it. Blame sabotage on lower caste to justify your planned crackdown on their organizing efforts. Rights for tools, for biological machinery." Vektis's contempt was palpable. "They exist to serve." "They're people. They're property." Vektis touched his desk. "And you've become a problem." The door sealed with a heavy clunk. Red emergency lights flooded the space as alarms shrieked. Zephia's head snapped up, recognizing the pattern. Atmospheric purge. Her eyes found the countdown on the wall display. 3 minutes until oxygen evacuation," Vektis said calmly, moving toward the manual override. "Security will find you both dead from an unfortunate malfunction." James lunged, but Vektis was faster, sealing the door completely. Zephia's mind raced through the office's systems, mapping them against her knowledge. Every room had maintenance access. Her eyes caught on a panel near the viewport. 2 minutes. I recommend contemplating the folly of valuing maintenance units over protocol." James caught her eye. Trust radiated from his gaze. He believed she could save them. Zafia moved to the wall panel, fingers finding hidden release catches. The panel popped free. 90 seconds. Those controls are locked to executive access. She pulled her multi-tool and jammed it into the control circuit, shorting the lockout. The panel sparked, went dark, then flickered alive, showing override options. 60 seconds. Her fingers flew, rerouting the purge to the adjacent conference room. Alarms cut off, red lights faded, air hissed through vents. Vektis stared in shock. "That's not possible." "Not if you know the systems well enough," Zafia said quietly, meeting his eyes. "I've maintained every environmental system on this station for 5 years. James moved fast, tackling Vektis before he reached the door controls. They hit the floor hard, the diplomat using efficient brutality to pin him. "Station security, this is Envoy James Dalton. Immediate response to Administrator Vektis's office. Attempted murder of diplomatic personnel." "No proof," Vektis snarled. "Your word against mine." "I recorded everything. Audio, video, your confession already transmitted to Earth's diplomatic servers." Vektis slumped defeated. Footsteps echoed outside, real security arriving. James stood slowly, blood on his lip from the fight. His eyes, when they met Zefia's, were bright. "You saved us." "We saved each other." The processing took hours. Officers actually wrote down Zefia's words like testimony that mattered. By evening cycle, they finally returned to James's quarters. The door sealed and adrenaline drained from Zephia all at once. She sagged against the wall, trembling. James was there immediately, hands on her shoulders. "Hey, you're safe, it's over." She looked up at him, the concern in his face, blood still on his lip. Without thinking, she reached up and touched the injury gently. He inhaled sharply. "You're hurt," she said. "I'm fine," but he didn't move from her touch. "Zephia." Her name spoken like that broke something inside her. All the fear, adrenaline, desperate want, it flooded through in an overwhelming wave. She rose on her toes and kissed him. He was still for one heartbeat, surprised. Then his hands tightened and he kissed her back with intensity that stole her breath. His mouth was hot and demanding. She moaned, fingers tangling in his hair. James pulled back just enough to look at her, pupils dilated. "Are you sure?" "I've never been sure of anything. But I want this. I want you." He kissed her again, deeper, walking her backward until her spine hit the wall. His body pressed against hers, solid and warm, and she felt the evidence of his desire. "Not here," James said roughly, his voice strained with want. "Not against a wall like this, doesn't matter." He swept her into his arms, carrying her toward his bedroom. The room was dim, lit only by stars beyond the viewport. He laid her on the bed with reverent care, his hands shaking slightly as he traced the line of her jaw. "You're beautiful," he said. "I've been trying not to think about this since the moment I saw you. But Zafia, you're extraordinary." She pulled him down to her, desperate to feel his weight, his heat. He kissed her slowly this time, thoroughly, like they had all the time in the universe. His hands moved over her body with careful exploration, and she arched into his touch. They shed their clothes between kisses and whispered words, learning each other in the starlight. James worshipped every inch of her emerald skin, his touch reverent and hungry at once. When he settled between her thighs, she wrapped herself around him, and they came together with gasps and sighs that spoke of connection deeper than words. The pleasure built slowly, intensely, until Zephia shattered in his arms with his name on her lips. James followed moments later, and they held each other through the aftershocks, breathless and trembling. In the quiet that followed, tangled together with hearts still racing, James traced patterns on her skin and pressed kisses to her forehead. That was... Zafia couldn't find words adequate for what she'd just experienced. "Perfect," James finished softly. "You're perfect, Zeph." The nickname, casual and intimate, made warmth bloom in her chest. She smiled against his shoulder, feeling something fundamental shift inside her. This wasn't just physical desire or gratitude. This was deeper, more terrifying. This was hope. They lay together in the starlight while the station hummed around them. Outside, conspiracies were unraveling and power structures were shifting. But here, there was only the two of them and the future they were beginning to imagine. A future where she wasn't invisible or worthless. Where she was enough. Zafia woke, wrapped in warmth, James's arm draped across her waist. Starlight still filtered through the viewport, casting shadows across his sleeping face. She studied him in the dim light, the line of his jaw, the slight furrow between his brows, even in sleep, the rise and fall of his chest against her back. She'd never spent a full night with another person, never known the intimacy of shared sleep, of waking tangled together. Her fingers traced idle patterns on his forearm, memorizing the feel of his skin. James stirred, his arm tightening around her reflexively before his eyes opened. When he saw her watching him, a slow smile spread across his face. "Morning," he said, voice rough with sleep. "Morning." He kissed her shoulder, then her neck, and she felt desire spark through her again despite the pleasant soreness between her thighs. But his comm device chirped insistently from the nightstand, shattering the moment. James groaned and reached for it, squinting at the display. His expression shifted from sleepy contentment to sharp focus. He sat up quickly, pulling the screen closer. "What is it?" Zafia asked, pushing herself upright. "Vektis' encrypted files. Security cracked them overnight." James's fingers flew across the display, scanning rapidly. His jaw tightened. "Zeph, this is worse than we thought." She moved beside him, reading over his shoulder. The files detailed everything: communications between high-ranking Veridian officials, plans to stage multiple sabotages across lower-caste sections, projected casualty numbers in the thousands. The conspiracy wasn't just about justifying a crackdown, it was about eliminating enough lower-caste workers to terrify the survivors into complete submission. They were going to kill thousands, Zafia whispered, her blood running cold. The environmental failure in the diplomatic wing was just a test. The main event is scheduled for today. James pulled up a schematic. Simultaneous failures in the lower residential sectors during shift change when population density is highest. Zephia's mind raced through the station's layout, seeing the affected areas with perfect clarity. The communal dormitories where she'd slept for 5 years. The mess halls where workers ate in hurried silence. The transit corridors connecting industrial sectors, all filled with people during shift change. When, she asked. 4 hours. They're using an automated sequence triggered remotely. By the time anyone realizes what's happening, it'll be too late to stop it manually. Not if someone accesses the primary environmental control center and overrides the automation. James looked at her sharply. Can you do that? The control center is in the station's core. Maximum security, elite access only. But yes, if I can get to the main system, I can override it. Zephia grabbed the borrowed clothes from last night, dressing quickly. We need to move now. Zeph, wait. James caught her arm gently. If we go public with this, if you're seen accessing those systems, you'll be targeted. The conspiracy runs deeper than just Vektis. There are others who will do anything to protect themselves. I know, she met his eyes steadily, but if I don't, thousands of people will die, people like me, people who've spent their whole lives invisible, who think they don't matter. I can't let that happen. James cupped her face with both hands, his expression fierce with pride and fear. Then we do this together. I'm not letting you face this alone. He kissed her hard, a promise and a claim all at once. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. Get dressed, Zafia said. We have work to do. They moved through the station with purpose. James using his diplomatic credentials to access restricted lifts, while Zafia navigated their route through her mental map of the infrastructure. The core was heavily guarded, but James's authorization got them past the first 2 checkpoints. The third was different. Commander Rella stood at the entrance to the Environmental Control Center, her security detail flanking her with weapons ready. Envoy Dalton, Rella said, her voice cold. I'm afraid this area is restricted even to diplomatic personnel. We have evidence of an imminent attack on the lower residential sectors, James said, not breaking stride. I need access to the environmental controls to prevent it. Administrator Vektis's ravings aren't evidence. Rella moved to block their path. He's facing execution for his crimes. Naturally, he's attempting to implicate others to save himself. These files came from his personal servers, James said, holding up his datapad. Encrypted communications detailing the conspiracy. Your name appears in them, Commander. Rella's expression didn't change, but her hand moved to her sidearm. Then I'm afraid I can't let you pass, for security reasons. We're not asking permission. James's voice went hard. As a representative of Earth's government, I'm invoking diplomatic emergency protocols. Stand aside or I'll report this as an act of hostility against human interests. Report what you like. You'll both be dead before the transmission reaches Earth. The security officers raised their weapons. Zephia's heart hammered against her ribs as she calculated angles and distances. They were outgunned, outmaneuvered. But her eyes caught on something. A maintenance panel, 10 meters to their left, partially hidden behind a decorative column. James, she said quietly, when I move, run for the control center doors. Zeph, trust me. She dove for the maintenance panel before anyone could react, her fingers finding the release, even as weapons fire scorched the air where she'd been standing. The panel opened and she grabbed the emergency system inside, yanking the manual override. Alarms shrieked as every door in the section began emergency lockdown protocols. The control center entrance started closing, a slow, inexorable process designed to seal the core during catastrophic failures. James ran for it without hesitation. Commander Rella fired, the energy bolt catching James in the shoulder. He stumbled but kept moving, diving through the closing door just as it sealed with a heavy clunk. Zephia sprinted after him, sliding through the narrowing gap with centimeters to spare. They were in, but James was hurt, blood spreading across his shoulder. Zafia caught him as he staggered, taking his weight. "How bad?" she asked. "I've had worse," he said through gritted teeth. "The controls, can you reach them?" The environmental control center spread before them, a massive room filled with holographic displays showing every system on the station. Zafia helped James to a chair, then moved to the main console with hands that wanted to shake but wouldn't let themselves. This was her world. These systems, these connections, she knew them with absolute certainty. Her fingers flew across the interface, navigating through layers of security with practiced ease. Each barrier she'd watched elite technicians bypass over 5 years of invisible maintenance work. The Sabotage program was elegant and terrible. Automated atmospheric purges timed to maximize casualties, designed to look like catastrophic system failures. But whoever had programmed it didn't understand the environmental systems the way she did. They'd left vulnerabilities in their arrogance, assuming no lower-caste worker would ever access these controls. They'd underestimated her. Everyone had. Zephia isolated the malicious code and began systematically dismantling it. Outside, Commander Rella was shouting orders, her security team working to override the emergency lockdown. The doors would open eventually, maybe minutes, maybe longer. She had to work faster. "Zeph, they're cutting through," James said, watching the door strain against forced entry. Almost there. Sweat beaded on her green skin as she rerouted critical pathways, rebuilding fail-safes that had been deliberately disabled. The conspiracy had spent weeks setting this up. She had minutes to undo it. The final sequence deleted with a satisfying chime. Zafia pulled up the master override and locked every environmental system on the station to manual control only, then encrypted the lockout with administrative credentials only she and James possessed. The Sabotage program was dead, its automated triggers useless. "Done," she said, sagging back from the console. "They're safe." The door exploded inward with a concussive blast. Commander Rela strode through smoke and debris, weapon raised. Her security team fanned out, surrounding them. "Step away from the controls," Rela ordered. Zephia stood slowly, placing herself between the commander and James. "It's over. The Sabotage is disabled. Even if you kill us, you can't restart it without the encryption keys." "Then I'll simply shoot you both and claim you were the saboteurs." Rela's weapon didn't waver. "No one will question my word over a maintenance drone and a dead human." "They will when they see this." James held up his comm device despite his injured shoulder. "Live transmission to Earth's diplomatic corps. They've been watching everything since we entered this room. Your confession, your attempt to stop us from preventing mass murder, it's all recorded." Rayla's composure finally cracked. Her weapon hand trembled with rage. "You've destroyed everything. The natural order, the hierarchy that keeps this station functioning." "The hierarchy that treats people as tools," Zafia said, her voice steady despite fear coursing through her. "That values some lives over others based on arbitrary caste assignments. That was already broken, Commander. We just stopped you from killing thousands to maintain it." "Weapons down!" The command came from the corridor behind Rayla. Station security, real security, not conspirators, poured in with weapons trained on the commander and her team. At their head was a Veridian officer Zafia, vaguely recognized, his expression grim. "Commander Rayla, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit mass murder, attempted assassination of diplomatic personnel, and treason against the station charter." Rayla's weapon clattered to the floor. Her shoulders slumped in defeat as security restrained her. The officer approached James and Zafia, his movements careful and respectful. "Envoy Dalton, you need medical attention. And you?" He looked at Zafia directly, actually meeting her eyes. "You saved thousands of lives today. The station owes you a debt that can't be repaid." Zafia didn't know how to respond to that. She'd spent her entire life invisible, and now people were looking at her, seeing her, acknowledging what she'd done. The cognitive dissonance made her dizzy. James stood with difficulty, his good arm wrapping around her waist. "She's extraordinary. I've been telling people that since we met. Medical personnel arrived, insisting on treating James's shoulder. Zephia stayed close to him, refusing to let distance grow between them, even as doctors worked. Her hand found his, fingers interlacing. "We did it, Zeph," James said quietly, squeezing her hand. "You did it." "We did it together," she corrected, echoing her words from yesterday. It felt like years ago that she'd been just a maintenance worker, invisible and forgettable. Everything had changed in mere days. Everything had changed the moment James Dalton asked her name. As they were escorted from the control center for debriefing and medical treatment, Zafia looked back at the systems she'd just saved. Those environmental controls she knew better than her own heartbeat, that she'd maintained faithfully for 5 years while everyone looked through her like she didn't exist. She'd never be invisible again. For better or worse, she'd stepped into the light. And she wasn't afraid anymore. The medical bay was crowded with officials and security personnel. Zafia sat on an exam table, watching doctors treat James's shoulder wound while administrators argued about jurisdiction in low voices. She felt exposed under the bright lights, hyper-aware of every gaze landing on her. A week ago, she would have made herself smaller, trying to disappear. Now she kept her spine straight and chin up, meeting the stares that came her way. James caught her eye from across the room and smiled despite the doctor's ministrations. That smile steadied her, reminded her why she'd chosen visibility over safety. The debriefing took hours. Zafia recounted everything while officials recorded her words. For the first time in her life, people treated her testimony as valuable evidence rather than dismissible noise. By the time they finished, exhaustion pulled at her limbs. James's shoulder was bandaged and immobilized in a sling. He found her immediately when officials released them, his good hand reaching for hers. "Come on, let's get out of here." They returned to his quarters in silence. The door sealed, and Zafia felt something inside her chest unlock. She turned to James and just looked at him. This human who'd seen her when no one else had, who'd trusted her expertise, who'd been wounded protecting what she was trying to accomplish. "Your shoulder? Are you in pain?" "The medical staff gave me something. I'm fine." He moved closer, his good hand cupping her face. "You were incredible today, Zeph." "I was terrified every second. I thought we'd fail." "But you didn't." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "You saved thousands of lives. You proved that worth has nothing to do with caste." "I proved it to them. I'm still working on proving it to myself." He kissed her softly, carefully mindful of his injured shoulder. She returned the kiss with growing intensity, her hands sliding into his hair. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes were dark with desire and emotion. "I need you to know something," James said, his voice rough. "This isn't just attraction or gratitude. What I feel for you, it's real, Zeph. You're real to me in a way nothing else has been in a long time." Zafia's breath caught at the raw honesty in his voice. "I feel it too. I don't have words for it, but I feel it." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and she responded with equal hunger. They made their way to the bedroom, shedding clothes and inhibitions between heated kisses and whispered confessions. Despite his injured shoulder, James found ways to touch her that made her gasp and arch into him. They came together slowly, carefully, learning each other anew. The connection between them went deeper than physical pleasure. It was about trust, about seeing and being seen, about two people from different worlds finding completion in each other's arms. Later, wrapped in sheets with starlight painting patterns across their skin, Zafia felt more content than she'd ever imagined possible. "I need to tell you something," James said quietly, his good arm holding her close. "Earth's diplomatic corps sent me new orders while you were being debriefed." Ice flooded her veins. "You're leaving?" "Not exactly. They want to formalize relations with the Veridian government, establish a permanent human presence here, but they're making an unprecedented request." He shifted to look at her properly. "They want you as the official Veridian liaison to humanity." Zafia sat up slowly, her mind reeling. "That's not possible. The Veridian government would never." "They already have. The conspiracy's exposure forced their hand. They need to demonstrate reform." He sat up beside her, wincing slightly as his shoulder protested. "But Zeph, this is your choice. If you accept, Your life will never be private again. You'll be a symbol whether you want to be. If you refuse, I'll support that decision completely." "What about us?" James took her hand, interlacing their fingers. "If you accept, I'll be working with you every day, building this relationship between our species. If you refuse, I'll still be here, and we'll figure it out." He squeezed gently. "Either way, I'm not walking away from you." Zafia looked at their joined hands, his skin pale against her emerald green, two different worlds intertwined. A week ago she'd been invisible, convinced of her own worthlessness. Now she was being offered a position that would make her one of the most visible people on the station. The scared part of her wanted to refuse, but a stronger part remembered standing in the environmental control center with weapons pointed at her, knowing she was doing something that mattered. Remembered James looking at her with trust and pride. Remembered learning she wasn't worthless. "I'll do it. I accept the position." James's face broke into a brilliant smile. He pulled her close with his good arm, kissing her thoroughly. "I'm so proud of you." The ceremony 3 days later was held in the station's largest assembly hall. Zephia stood backstage in simple, elegant, formal attire. James stood beside her, his shoulders still healing. "Ready?" he asked. "No, but I'm doing it anyway." The hall was packed. Elite Veridians in front, lower-caste workers in back, diplomatic representatives from multiple species in the middle. Zephia walked onto the stage, her legs shaking, but her spine straight. After the formal establishment of her position and James's speech about partnership, it was her turn. She stepped to the podium and looked out at the sea of faces. "My name is Zafia. For 5 years I worked maintenance on this station. I was invisible, worthless, a tool without acknowledgement or respect." She paused, seeing elite discomfort and lower caste hope. "Then I met someone who didn't see a tool or a caste designation, who saw a person with knowledge and value, who asked my name and actually wanted to hear the answer." Her eyes found James. "That person helped me understand something I should have known all along. My worth was never determined by how others saw me. It was always there." She told her story plainly, the sabotage, the arrest, the conspiracy, stopping the mass casualties. "I accept this position not because I'm special or different from other lower caste workers. I accept it because I'm exactly the same as them. We all have value. We all matter. And I'm going to spend every day proving that to anyone who still doesn't believe it." The applause was deafening. Lower caste workers were on their feet, some openly weeping. Even the elite clapped with polite restraint. James met her as she stepped away, pulling her into an embrace regardless of cameras and witnesses. "You were perfect." That night, back in their shared quarters, they celebrated privately. The intimacy between them had deepened beyond physical connection. It was about partnership, about building something together that neither could create alone. They held each other in the starlight, talking about the future, making plans and promises. Afterward, wrapped in his arms, Zephia looked out at the viewport showing the station's exterior. She'd spent 5 years crawling through those walls, maintaining systems while everyone above walked without knowing she existed. "What are you thinking?" James asked sleepily. "That a week ago I was nobody, and now I'm somebody." "You were always somebody, Zeph. The universe just needed time to catch up." She smiled in the darkness, feeling his warmth against her back. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, navigating diplomatic relations, proving herself daily. But tonight she was just Zephia, held by someone who saw her truly. She'd spent her whole life invisible, thinking she was worthless. It had taken a human treating her like royalty to realize the truth. She'd never been worthless. She'd never been invisible. She'd just been surrounded by people too blind to see. But she saw herself now, and that made all the difference.